They were so pious and sanctimonious about the Tories when they were in opposition, and they had plenty to have a go at on the Tories. There's no question about that. But it's now come back to bite them. The Sue Gray thing, I think, is a bit more worrying because it suggests that Keir Starmer doesn't have control of Downing Street in the way he should. And of course, that brought Boris Johnson down. He didn't have control of Downing Street. It was chaotic. And when a prime minister has to say, look, I'm in control, when he has to say that less than 3 months in power, you know it's a real mess. You know it's in real trouble. When he had normally prime ministers say, I'm in control in their dying days. That's not in their first 3 months.
Imagine, if you will, a political collision so devastating that it makes a high-speed motorway pile-up look like a minor misunderstanding in a car park. We're talking about the moment Sir Keir Starmer, a man whose charisma has the approximate potency of a damp tea bag left in lukewarm water, walked into the interrogation room with Andrew Neil. It was not just an interview, it was a total forensic dismantling. Andrew Neil did not just grill the Labour leader, he turned him into political soup, lukewarm, flavourless and confusingly grey. If you thought Starmer could dodge questions like Neo in The Matrix, wait until you see him fumble like he's lost his Wi-Fi connection mid-sentence. This was a public roast, a total humiliation that left Starmer looking like the guy who accidentally showed up to a knife fight with a plastic spoon. Quick favour, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It's free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Thanks, if you did. Now back to the show. First off, we must address the vibe currently emanating from number 10. Sir Keir Starmer carries all the warmth and spontaneity of a malfunctioning chatbot programmed by a team of risk-averse compliance officers. His political style screams, I am here to follow the script. Please do not ask me to improvise. Watching him talk politics is like sitting through an endless legal deposition where no one gets excited and everyone is just praying for the sweet release of the lunch break. Enter Andrew Neil. The man is a human scalpel, precise, sharp, and ready to dissect Starmer's every word with clinical efficiency. Neil is not here to make friends or discuss the weather. He is here to ask the questions Starmer has spent his entire career trying to sidestep. Watching Neil poke holes in Starmer's armor is like watching a lion toy with a particularly limp gazelle. It is brutal, relentless, and oddly satisfying for anyone who values a straight answer. Almost immediately, Starmer's serious lawyer act began to crack. He tried the usual stony-faced stare that I am thinking deeply about the working class look, but let us be honest, he looked more like someone who just realized he left the oven on at home while standing on a stage in front of millions.
But that's not process, that's
well,
the
you're
rules.
following the process, but there's a bigger principle at stake, that Labour Party members who are being asked to vote for you should know who's bankrolling your campaign.
That is why the Labour Party set up those rules.
But you won't tell us.
The Labour Party rules say, carry out the checks, which we have to carry out, and I've got a compliance team doing that. Once you're satisfied the checks are carried out and the donations are proper in order, they go to the parliamentary authorities who put them on the parliamentary website so that everybody can see them. I've been following that procedure. That is exactly the parliamentary
But the other
rules.
candidates in this contest have published who is bankrolling their campaign. You seem to be hiding behind this process. Why won't you simply tell us tonight who are your 5 biggest donors?
Andrew, how can you say I'm hiding behind a process when it's the Labour Party process? The Labour Party, beginning of
Because you're hiding behind the process.
The real fun began when Starmer's economic plan started sounding less like national policy and more like the political equivalent of just trust me, brother. With the confidence of a man who has never had to explain the service charge on a bill, he tossed around lofty phrases like investment in growth and fair redistribution, as if those words alone would magically balance the books of a post-2025 Britain. But when pressed for actual numbers, Starmer gave the kind of vague non-answers you would expect from someone who studied macroeconomics at Hogwarts. It was like listening to someone describe a utopia where money rains from the sky and prosperity is just one heartfelt speech away. Except, Starmer forgot to mention where the clouds were coming from or who was footing the bill for the umbrellas. Every promise sounded magnificent, in theory, right up until the moment Andrew Neil asked how it would actually work in the real world. Then, suddenly the entire platform dissolved into a cloud of buzzwords, wishful thinking, and the subtle art of hoping no one asks a follow-up question. His economic blueprint had all the realism of a fairy tale, minus the talking animals and the happy ending. If leadership means pretending to have a plan while actually just holding a blank piece of paper, then Starmer is practically the Prime Minister of Narnia.
Why don't you do what the other candidates do and don't Labour members have a right, as they decide whether to vote for you or not, they want to know where your money's coming from?
I've been asked that many times. I've said it's coming from trade unions, from crowdfunding, from individual donations.
Who's your biggest donor?
It's coming from those three. One of my biggest donors was put up on the website, I think, yesterday.
Right, that's one of the lawyer.
Yeah.
That's the law. But who are your 5 biggest donors?
Well,
you haven't announced. You've only announced about £125,000 worth of donations. This campaign costs a lot more than that. Doesn't transparency just demand? I mean, it's causing you a problem.
Neil's fact checks landed like industrial sledgehammers. We are not talking about the gentle rubber mallet kind. We are talking about the full-bore heavy-duty variety that smashes through facades and leaves rubble where half-truths used to stand. Every time Keir Starmer tried to insist that Labour had a clear and credible plan, Neil pulled out receipts like a man auditing a dodgy tax return from 2024. He had the charts, the numbers, the previous quotes, and the glaring contradictions. It was less of an interview and more of a forensic autopsy performed on a living subject. Starmer would say something vaguely optimistic about the transition to green energy, and Neil would respond by essentially holding up a giant neon sign that read, "Wrong." Each fact check chipped away at the illusion of competence. Starmer's responses did not just lack detail, they lacked direction. It was like watching someone try to assemble IKEA furniture without the manual, the tools, or even the right number of screws. Instead of specifics, he offered jargon-laced generalities, the political equivalent of filling in a multiple-choice test with C for every answer and praying for a passing grade. The more Neil pushed, the more Starmer folded into his trademark fog of ambiguity. It was like watching a man try to juggle smoke, impressive in a way, but ultimately useless. With each probing question, Starmer seemed less like a prime minister and more like a malfunctioning AI, trained solely on corporate mission statements. He has become the lead actor in the political fog machine, a tragicomedy featuring one man, infinite buzzwords, and absolutely no definitive answers. Platitudes poured out of him so thick and shapeless they could have been classified as a new environmental hazard. He spoke of moving forward and building consensus with all the energy of a GPS stuck in a roundabout. Every sentence felt meticulously engineered to sound meaningful, while saying absolutely nothing, the political equivalent of decaffeinated coffee, familiar, palatable, and entirely ineffective. One moment he was boldly refusing to rule things out, the next he was cautiously declining to rule them in. At one point he seemed to hover in a quantum state of policy, where he both supported and opposed something simultaneously, a Schrodinger's politician if you will. The only consistent takeaway was that Starmer clearly wanted to give the impression of having a plan without committing to anything that might one day come back to haunt him. Unfortunately for him, cutting through that mist is precisely what Andrew Neil does for a living.
I mean, there are a lot of fundamental issues which need to be tackled in our country. A lot of them are allowed just to atrophy under the Conservatives. They ran out of any reforming zeal. But given the scale of problems that we face, from health to infrastructure and so on, he just doesn't have the blueprint that is going to put that right. I think he can do some things that will improve matters, but this will not be a transformative government. He doesn't have it in him to be transformative. The cabinet isn't good enough to be transformative either. So I think it's the best you can hope for is that things get a bit better. And, even that would be something.
Here is where the roast really hits home. Starmer's so-called vision for the country. You would expect the leader of the nation, someone whose entire job is to offer a clear path forward, to have an inspiring plan for Britain's future, right? Well, brace yourself, because what Starmer delivered was about as clear as a London fog in 1952. When Neil asked Starmer to paint a picture of what a Labour-led Britain would actually look like in 5 years, all he got was a political PowerPoint with the key slides missing and bullet points that simply did not add up. It was like someone hit skip intro on an entire strategy session. Starmer's answers were a parade of uninspired cliches, so overused they probably have their own pension plans by now. Building back better, uniting the country, investing in the future, it was all served lukewarm and half-baked. It felt less like a visionary speech and more like a political safe zone where no risk was taken and no original thought was allowed to peek through the curtains. Honestly, it was like Starmer was trying to describe a movie he had never actually seen or summarizing a book he had only skimmed for 5 minutes in the back of a taxi. There was no substance, no passion, just an endless loop of carefully rehearsed corporate speak. And while Starmer babbled in circles, desperately trying to make sense but only managing to sound like a confused parrot on repeat, Neil's expression was absolutely priceless. It was a perfect cocktail of disbelief, pity, and that classic "please stop embarrassing yourself" look you give when someone keeps digging their own grave with a smile on their face. Watching Starmer struggle was like watching someone try to explain TikTok to their great-grandparents. Painfully awkward, excruciatingly slow, and frankly, a bit tragic.
Pretty much consign everything Labour had to say about tax during the election campaign to the dustbin of history. Consider how the narrative has changed. Before the election, we were assured that all Labour spending plans were fully costed and that there was no need for taxes to rise, bar a few small and specific increases like VAT on school fees. Within weeks of being elected, Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed to have discovered a £22 billion fiscal black hole left behind by the dastardly Tory. PR and the IFS had already warned that Labour would inherit an eye-wateringly tight fiscal position, but that didn't stop Reeves affecting to be surprised. Nobody else.
You could practically see the collective eye rolls from the viewers at home, wondering if this man actually knew what he was talking about, or if he was just reading from a script written by a committee of people who were equally lost. And just when you thought the roast could not get any more savage, Neil zeroed in on the internal chaos. Because if British politics is a stage, the current state of the Labour Party is like a toddler's birthday party gone horribly wrong. Screaming, tears, tantrums, and one meltdown after another. It is a circus act that no one signed up to watch, but no one can look away from either. By early 2006, the economic reality began to bite, and Andrew Neil was there to sharpen the teeth. He confronted Starmer with the latest figures from the Office for Budget Responsibility. The growth Starmer promised has been as elusive as a polite comment on social media. Neil pointed out that the government's tax burden is at a post-war high, yet public services are still operating with the efficiency of a one-legged man in a kicking contest. When Neil asked, "Where has the money gone, Prime Minister?" Starmer looked like he was trying to calculate the square root of a banana.
Yeah. And we'll look
I don't think sort of thrashing around and blaming X, Y, and Z.
But if you have nothing bad to say about it, and I would suggest to you, you cannot plan the future without understanding the past. And if you have nothing bad to say about Mr. Corbyn's leadership now, why did you take part in the attempt to topple him as leader in 2016?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of the referendum, I thought we needed a change, and I set out my reasons for it. We then had a leadership election. Jeremy won it convincingly. I accepted the members had put him in as leader, and I then served him for the next 3.5 years.
You said it was simply untenable to suggest that we can offer an effective opposition without a change of leader. Untenable.
But we then went through a process.
His response was a masterclass in deflection. He blamed the legacy of the previous administration, a line that by January 2026 was starting to sound as tight as a marathon runner in lead boots. Neil did not let him off the hook. He reminded Starmer that he had been in power long enough to own the current mess. The fiscal black hole is not just a metaphor anymore. It is the reality of a government that promised to spend while simultaneously promising not to tax, and now finds itself staring into an empty vault. If there were an Olympic sport for changing one's mind, Keir Starmer would be draped in gold, silver and bronze all at once. Andrew Neil meticulously went through the U-Turn Hall of Fame, reminding the audience of every promise Starmer made during his leadership campaign that has since been unceremoniously dumped into the political incinerator. From nationalising energy to the abolition of tuition fees, the list is longer than a Leonard Cohen song. Starmer tried to argue that changing your mind when the facts change is a sign of strength. Neil countered that changing your mind on everything is a sign that you never had a mind of your own in the first place. This is the authenticity gap. The British public can handle a leader who makes mistakes, but they struggle with a leader who seems to have been constructed in a laboratory by a team of focus group scientists. Every time Starmer backtracks, another brick falls out of his wall of credibility, and Neil was more than happy to give that wall a firm kick.
Can you give me one tough message from you in this campaign that the Corbyn left would find unpalatable?
Well, that we have to unite the party, and that means taking people wherever they are.
Everybody wants to unite the party.
Well, everybody wants to unite the party, but you've got to model unity. What I'm doing in my campaign is I've got people from different parts of the party on my campaign working together, because I know that simply saying unity isn't enough. Everybody's going to say
that's
that.
not
I've got to
unpalatable. What I'm
model
asking you is a position you're taking that the Corbyn left will find unpalatable.
Well, I'm not particularly interested in finding things that they find palatable or unpalatable.
In politics, perception is often more important than reality, and the perception after this live TV event was one of profound weakness. A leader who cannot defend their own record without stuttering is a leader who will struggle to command the respect of the international stage, let alone the rowdy benches of the House of Commons. Neil's ability to make Starmer look small was not just about the questions, it was about the lack of fight in the answers. There was no fire. No, listen, Andrew, this is why we are doing this. Instead, there was a lot of, well, if you look at the subsection of the report, this is why the memes sting so much. They tap into a truth that Labour's PR machine is desperate to hide, that their leader is a man of the establishment who's terrified of making a mistake. And in that terror, he makes the biggest mistake of all. He becomes forgettable. In the grand theatre of British life, being a villain is often better than being a background extra, but Starmer is currently auditioning for the role of Man in Grey Suit number 4. While Starmer was busy being audited by Neil, the rest of the country was watching the rise of a different kind of politics. Men like Ant Middleton, or even the more outspoken members of the backbenches, are gaining traction because they speak a language that Starmer has seemingly forgotten: English. Not consultant speak, not legalese, but plain, blunt, and occasionally rude English. Neil highlighted this divide perfectly. He asked Starmer why his approval ratings in the Red Wall have plummeted faster than a lead balloon in a vacuum.
Reeves says the budget was a one-off, that others won't be like this one. But if the OBR's anemic growth forecasts are still too optimistic, she will be back for more tax and more borrowing. But it was a watershed budget. It propels the UK tax burden and public spending as a share of GDP towards European social democratic levels. That was no accident. It was the chosen direction of travel of the Starmer-Reeves project. Just why, unless driven by ideology, they want to join a collection of economies synonymous with slow growth and stagnation is a puzzle. But that is where they've chosen to head. And the OBR, in terms of what it means for economic growth and living standards for the rest of this decade, has already spelled out the consequences.
Starmer's answer was to talk about structural realignments and long-term strategic objectives. Neil's silent stare in response said more than 1,000 words. It was like watching a computer try to process a command written in a dead language. The straight-talking rebellion is not just about policy, it is about a desire for human connection. People want a leader they could have a pint with, or at least one who wouldn't try to explain the regulatory framework of the brewery before taking a sip. Starmer's inability to connect on a human level is the invisible wall that Andrew Neil crashed him into over and over again. Neil then moved on to the most controversial topic of 2025 and 2026, the perception of two-tiered policing. He grilled Starmer on whether the justice system was being applied equally, or if political considerations were influencing how the law was enforced. Starmer, the former director of public prosecutions, should have been on home turf here. Instead, he looked like a man walking through a minefield in clown shoes. He defended the independence of the judiciary with all the passion of a man reading a terms and conditions agreement. Neil pushed back, citing specific cases where the sentencing seemed to the casual observer to be wildly inconsistent. Starmer's refusal to acknowledge the perception of unfairness was a gift to his critics. By January 2026, this issue has become a festering wound in the British body politic, and Starmer's clinical approach is acting as a very poor bandage. Neil exposed that for many people, Starmer is seen not as a champion of justice, but as an architect of a system that prioritizes optics of equity. Just when Starmer thought it couldn't get any worse, Neil invoked the name that makes number 10 staffers break out in a cold sweat: Andy Burnham. The King of the North has been casting a shadow over Starmer for years, but in January 2006, that shadow has become a total eclipse. Neil pointed out that according to the latest YouGov polls, nearly half of Britons, including nearly 40% of Labour's own 22-4 voters, believe it would be a good thing if Starmer was replaced. And guess who they want? Andy Burnham.
Been seeing some reports over the weekend that the government was briefing that this could add 2% to our GDP. Well, in their dreams, it's never going to do that. It's marginal at best. And the argument is not this deal on its own. Where does it lead? Is that the end of it? Is this the end of the reset?
Or is this the start of the reset? If it's the end of the reset, then it's marginal. There are some improvements in some areas where the government's made concessions that it shouldn't have done, but in the grand scheme of things, it's quite small.
Neil didn't just mention the polls. He highlighted the brutal reality that Starmer's own National Executive Committee, NEC, just blocked Burnham from standing in the Gorton and Denton by-election. Are you afraid of him, Prime Minister? Neil asked, with a glint in his eye that suggested he already knew the answer. Starmer's attempt to justify the move as a resource allocation issue was as convincing as a chocolate teapot. Neil exposed the frit factor, a term Margaret Thatcher once used to describe a cowardly opponent. By blocking the most popular man in the party from even entering the building, Starmer has painted a giant target on his own back. As the interview reached its peak, Neil pivoted to the threat from the right. Reform UK is no longer just a pressure group. By January 2026, they are a polling powerhouse, often neck and neck with Labour. Starmer's response to this has been to label their politics as toxic division. Neil, however, asked if it was toxic to listen to the concerns of millions of people who feel the current government is ignoring them. The contrast was staggering. While Reform is talking about national identity and immigration in blunt terms, Starmer is talking about process and international obligations. Neil noted that Starmer's suicidal empathy, a term gaining traction among his critics, seems to put the needs of everyone else above the needs of the British taxpayer. Starmer's inability to even define what a British person is without a 15-minute preamble was dissected by Neil with the precision of a master chef. It revealed a leader who is so afraid of being called intolerant that he has become intolerant of common sense.
I think and that's a tough one to answer, I think for Mr. Starmer it is, well, you say that, but you've said the following things over the past 5 years, none of which you now stand for. I interviewed him for the Labour leadership on the BBC. I think it was towards the end of February 2020, just before the pandemic started to hit. And he went through a whole range of things, nationalised rail, mail, energy, and so on, abolish universal credit, abolish university tuition fees, wealth tax, and all the rest of it. And I said, but how can we? He said, Andrew, these are not promises, these are pledges. Now, I didn't, just being a simple lad, didn't understand the difference between promise and pledge. I thought they're the same thing, but it doesn't matter what it means because he's broken them all. So I think that's a problem for him.
Let us dive deeper into the void where his policies should be. For months, the British public has been told that the grown-ups are back in charge, but the grown-ups seem to have forgotten to bring the shopping list. On every major issue, from the housing crisis to the soaring cost of energy, Starmer's response is to review the situation. Andrew Neil pointed out that you cannot house a family in a review and you cannot pay a gas bill with a consultation. This managerialism is Starmer's greatest weakness. He treats the United Kingdom like a struggling law firm that needs a new filing system, rather than a G7 nation in the midst of a cultural and economic identity crisis. Neil's relentless questioning on the specifics of the Green Prosperity Plan revealed that the prosperity part was a bit of a stretch, and the plan part was mostly just a collection of hopeful adjectives. This is the danger of Starmerism. It is a house built on the assumption that the Tories will be so bad that Labour doesn't actually have to be good. But, as Neil showed, not being the other guy is not a strategy for government. It is a recipe for a very short honeymoon and a very long, painful divorce from the electorate.
But you're right that we still don't know the details, though the one detail we've got, I think, is a problem for the government, which is it's basically rolling over the existing EU access to British fisheries waters for another 12 years. And I saw earlier you were a bit surprised by that because it's way above the upper end of what Britain was expected to concede. Some talked of 5, they maybe got up to 10, nobody was talking about 12. So I think the European Union will regard that as a major victory. That's a notch on their lap.
Keir Starmer's performance under the forensic gaze of Andrew Neil was a sobering reminder that in the top tier of politics, there is nowhere to hide. The forensic Keir persona was thoroughly dismantled, leaving behind a leader who appears more comfortable with paperwork than with people. The road to the next election just got a lot steeper for Labour. Thank you for watching.